So now you have two curves. One is IS, the other is LN, which is horizontal. We just spoke about it. So just put it together, and then the intersection between IS and LN, that's your interest rate. So what we learned so far is basically the mechanism that will generate output level on the x-axis and the interest rate level on the y-axis. That's basically what we accomplished today. So now we know how to determine the level of output in an economy and how to determine the interest rate in the economy. So if you follow that story closely, then you have no problem when you start to play with policy game. What happens if you increase money supply? What happens if government spending increase and so forth, right? Because you have learned up to now what is going on in the goods market, which determines the level of output, and the money market, which determines the interest rate. Okay. Before we proceed, one other thing that I need to inject element of reality here. Okay. Earlier I said that the central bank can control the money supply indirectly through the interest rate, right? But actually, even that is not 100% can be controlled by the central bank. Why? Because there is another variable which is called reserve requirement. Okay? Now, reserve requirement is like this, the story. Suppose you have a bank. Okay? Let's say you have 1 million in your bank, which is the money from the savers. So customer put 1 million rupiah in your bank. Okay. Now, of course, theoretically, you will use that money, 1 million, to lend to other people. So 1 million goes to your liability, and then you spend on the asset side in the form of credit. Okay. The problem is that if you receive 1 million, you cannot lend 1 million. You have to have some reserve there, right? Also, do not forget, if people put 1 million in your bank, and then you lend, let's say you lend 800, the people that you lend the money to will not be able to pay you immediately. Because credit, usually there's a time lag. So let's say you borrow money from the bank, I don't know, maybe for 5 years, right? So that means during that 5 years, you as a bank, you don't have that money because the money you already lent it to the investors. So there is a time gap there. Now imagine if that happened. That means you don't have that money now, right? And then all of a sudden, the people who put your money, that money in your bank, remember, 1 million, they need the money back. So they have to withdraw the money. So imagine if that is the case, you are in trouble, right? Because you don't have the money. You already lent the money to people. But now the saver wants to take out the money from you. So there is always risk like that. Of course, I'm a little bit exaggerating this story because, you know, that kind of a situation may not be widespread. But there is always risk there. So precisely in order to deal with such a risk, Central Bank, Bank Indonesia, have a policy which is called the reserve requirement. So in other words, if people put 1 million in your bank, certain percentage of that 1 million has to be put in the central bank. You see what I mean? That is called the reserve money. So the purpose is precisely what I told you earlier, if all of a sudden, let's say tomorrow, so today you get 1 million, but then all of a sudden tomorrow, one client, one customer wants to take out the money. And suppose you don't have the money, then you can get that reserve money from the bank, that from the central bank, that you put it there, because by requirement, you need to put some percentage of that money in the bank. So that is called the reserve requirement, okay? Now, remember that story about you have to make a choice. If you have 1 million rupiah, what do you do? How much you want to hold, and then how much you want to put it in the deposit. What you want to hold is currency and demand deposit. So this is the equation for the demand deposit here. So this is not about currency, but the demand deposit. Okay? So that demand deposit is basically a portion of the reserve that I was just telling you. And that portion, as I said, goes to the central bank. CB stands for the central bank. So that means central bank put your money. You are the bank, okay? You put some money. Now, let's say, usually it's 10%. Okay, so 10% of 1 million rupiah of customers' money that you have, now you have to put in the Bank Indonesia. Okay, that is the reserve money. Okay, so if you combine this concept with what you learned earlier about, remember the LN curve is flat, horizontal. So when you combine that, then you have this equation. I don't want to go, because this is algebra, high school algebra is just substitution here and there and so on. But the point here at the end, what you have is here. So this is the money supply on your left hand side, and this is the money demand on your right hand side. Okay. So let's look at the money supply here. Remember, in the LN curve, if it is horizontal, it's really the policy of the central bank of Indonesia, right? So let's look at more detail. What happened here? There is what is called the reserve money. This is Rn. Okay. And this component is called money multiplier. Where is all this coming from? Just look at this. Above here. Okay. Remember the story of reserve requirement I said? So I'm making assumption, suppose it's 10%. Then you put into the equation and at the end you have this. Okay? So this is what is called the money multiplier. So the story goes like this. If the central bank, if Bank Indonesia wants to increase money supply, what they can do is to increase this Rn. Okay? Because if Rn increase, assuming everything in this money multiplier remains constant, then the money supply, the entire multiplication will go up. And vice versa. If Bank Indonesia wants to contract the money, then they reduce the Rn, the reserve money. And assuming this is constant, then the total money supply will reduce. So what does it mean? Well, that means money multipliers play a very important role here, right? Can Bank Indonesia control that? Not everything they can. Remember, look at this component here. What parameters do you think Bank Indonesia can control? Anybody can raise your hand? Anybody can answer that? Yes. Yes, please.
The right hand side, the money supply side. So
yeah, but which one? Which variable or parameters that Bank Indonesia can control? Look at that equation. Which one? let me repeat, okay? Let me repeat and then you try again. RM, piece of money, that is directly controlled by Bank Indonesia, directly, okay? So they can increase, they can reduce, and so on. But RM is only small component of the MS, of the money supply. You know? The other component is this guy, okay, which is called the money multiplier. So my question is, of all these parameters in the money multiplier, which one do you think Bank Indonesia can control?
Is it a reserve requirement?
Correct. So the RR here, right? This is what Bank Indonesia can change. For example, if the economy is slowing down and Bank Indonesia wants to stimulate the economy, then they will reduce the RR. Why? What is the logic? Why Bank Indonesia reduce the reserve requirement if they want to stimulate the economy? Yes?
Maybe because the bank, if the reserve requirement is decreased, the bank can give more money to the consumer or the producer, so they can produce more, and it can increase the output.
Correct. So that is the reason. So remember the story earlier. Every bank has to put some percentage in the Bank Indonesia, and that is called the reserve requirement. So now, if they reduce the requirement from 10% to 5%, for example, then there will be more money in the hand of banks, right? So that means that bank can lend more, and that will stimulate the economy. So that's the whole idea. Okay? Now, let me ask you the next one. In the money multiplier, RR is controlled by the Bank Indonesia. What about C? Can Bank Indonesia control C?
Sir?
Yes.
I think for the central bank, they cannot control C because it comes from the consumer.
Yes, correct. Because basically the C, remember this equation, C is determining the curve, which is currency, and the demand deposit. Remember I began explaining money market by telling you that you have a money, right? 1 million rupiah, and then you decide how much is 1 million you want to hold in cash or demand deposit, and how much you want to save. That decision is not the decision of Bank Indonesia, it's your decision. And that's why how much you want to hold demand deposit and currency, that has nothing to do with what Bank Indonesia can do. It's your own decision. Okay? So that's why this money multiplier only partially can be determined by the Bank Indonesia. Only the RR out of the money multiplier. So remember this, okay? I don't know how many of you eventually will work in a bank or in monetary economics, but this is very important. Not many people understand that because they thought that central bank is always able to control money supply. No, they cannot. Only partially they can, but not entirely. Okay? So today you learn already one of the most famous concept in macroeconomics, which is called the ISLN, this curve. Okay? And in fact, I just found this morning there's a new book written by Nobel Prize winner Robert Shiller. And in that book, the title of the book is Narrative Economics. And in that book, he put this chart. which is indicating there are 4 macroeconomic concepts that are so popular around the world. By the way, this is around the world, okay? That are so popular around the world. And look at the position of ISLN, which you just learned. It's pretty high, right? So ISLN is this one, basically. So the way they do is they use what they call the Google Ngrams. So this is almost like a Google map, but essentially the Google Ngrams was able to detect a particular words or particular terms, and they can calculate around the world how many times the terms has been used. Look at how many times the ISLN has been used. It's pretty high, actually. But that is only an indication how important is the concept that we just learned today with this ISLN.